Okay, so Oscar Wilde's point is that people will be really obsessed with Japanese paintings and comic books and fabric and samurai swords and shit. Um, and they think they're learning about Japan. And Oscar Wilde, his whole point, if Plato's right and Pope is right, and art is a copy of reality, then you could learn a lot about people by just, studying the art. But Oscar Wilde's point is that he says art is an escape. Art tells lies. Art is supposed to. Reality sucks. Let's have art to get away from reality. If that's the case, then learning about comic books and fabric and these kinds of things from Japan are not telling you about the Japanese people. In which case, but the problem is that people think they're learning about Japanese people. They'll go, oh, I know a lot about Japan. Do you? Or do you know a lot about comic books from Japan? Oscar Wilde's point is not the same thing. And that's why he makes this joke about how the Japanese people, he says, and he's sort of kidding, but he says there is no such country, there are no such people. Now, of course, there are people who are Japanese, and there is a country called Japan. But his point is that there's no such country, and there are no such people as you would find in anime. Naruto will tell you about no country and no people. It's a separate. It's not telling you anything about Japan. The problem is and this is where I think it's interestingly anti-racist, is that people think they know what Japanese people are like from comic books. And then they end up saying racist things. That's how you end up asking, Japanese people, like think about a racist thing you could say to a Japanese person, where you're like, oh, you guess you have a lot of samurai swords or something. Like, that would be racist, just to assume anybody from China knows kung fu, or right, these kinds of racial stereotypes. Where do they come from? They come from art, because if 100% of the Chinese people that you see are from martial arts movies, then that's not telling you. And then you're like, oh, I know about Chinese people. They're really good at martial arts. Like, that's why it's racist, is because what you've learned, you've gotten from art. And of course, Oscar Wilde's whole point is not to say, let's stop having martial arts movies. He's not against martial arts movies. He just wants you to remember, these are lies. These are made up. This is fiction. This is not a representation of reality. It's not a representation. Martial arts movies are not a representation of what Chinese people are like, and Japanese comic books are not a representation of what Japanese people are like. And that's why I think he's doing anti-racist work, is because for Wilde, like a lot of racism comes from stereotypes, and a lot of stereotypes come from art. So, like, if every Muslim person that you see on TV is a terrorist, then you get a lot of people who are like, oh, I guess all Muslims must be terrorists, and it's racist, because they think that by seeing Muslim people in American TV shows, they're learning about actual real-life Muslim people. It's not like that, and I'm sure you guys are from all over the world. I'm sure you have seen a show where the characters go to your home country, and you're like, that's not what that country is like at all. All right, cool. Art tells lies. So let's keep going a little bit with this. Oh, I gotta turn the page. I forgot to do that. I'm gonna kind of review this while I'm down here. So one of our most charming painters went to Japan, the land of the chrysanthemum, in the foolish hope of seeing the Japanese, and all he had, all the chance of painting, were a few lanterns and some fans. He was quite unable to discover the inhabitants. He did not know that the Japanese people are, as I have said, simply a mode of style and exquisite fancy of art, because when people in England in 1890 talk about Japanese people, they talk about the paintings, not the people. They just think they're talking about the people. They don't know anything about the people. Most people in London in 1890 had not met a lot of Japanese people and had never been to Japan. So he says, like, if you will, he says, on the contrary, he says, if you want to learn about Japanese art, you will not behave like a tourist and go to Tokyo. You don't visit the country if you want to understand the art. You just study the art. You'll stay at home and steep yourself in the work of certain Japanese artists, and then, when you have absorbed the spirit of their style, caught their imaginative manner of vision, you will go some afternoon and sit in the park or stroll in Piccadilly, and if you cannot see an absolute Japanese effect there, you will not see it anywhere. So the point is studying art is the thing. So let's talk a little bit more about this. He has another example here, which I quite like. He talks about ancient Greeks. That was another thing they really liked in the 19th century in England. He says, do you think that Greek art ever tells us what the Greek people were like? Do you believe that the Athenian women were like stately, dignified figures of the Parthenon frieze? He's talking about like paintings and sculptures from ancient Greece. Or like those marvelous goddesses who sat in the triangular pediments of some building? If you judge from the art, they certainly were so. But read an authority, like Aristophanes, for instance, and you will, Aristophanes probably. And you will find the Athenian ladies laced tightly, wore high-heeled shoes, dyed their hair yellow, painted and rouged their faces, and were exactly like any silly, fashionable, or fallen creature of our own day. Right? People in ancient Greece, they weren't like beautiful statues; they were just like regular people. The fact is that we look back on the ages entirely through the medium of art, and art, very fortunately, has never once told us the truth, because he likes that. It's called this essay is called "The Decay of Lying" because he thinks art is lies, and the reason he calls it the decay of lying is because in his day people were very interested in being realistic. Like Pope, right? Pope had told them realism is very important, and people were like, yeah, realism. Let's do realism, um, and it was people were really into it. And Oscar Wilde was like, this is terrible. Being realistic makes really bad art. He doesn't want art to be realistic. He wants it to be an escape from reality. Um, and to that end, I'm going to tell you something else. One of my favorite examples, and I'll put some pictures on. Let's see, I think the bugs are still getting me. I'll put some pictures up. Um, he puts a he mentions ancient Greece and how the paintings and the statues don't really represent what the actual people were like. They actually, interestingly, the ancient Greek statues don't even represent what the ancient Greek statues were like. I'm sure you guys have seen images of ancient Greek statues, like in museums, right? And they're white marble statues of these kinds of like beautiful naked people. You know, they're like throwing a discus, or they have a javelin, or and I'll put some images up so you can see. But right, ancient Greek statues. They have a look. They're white. The most famous thing about ancient Greek statues is that they're all pale white. They're just made of like white marble and white stone and whatever. Interestingly, scientists, because back when in Oscar Wilde's day, because ancient Greece was like 500 years before the birth of Christ. But in scientists now, and in Oscar Wilde's day, they had all these statues in museums, and all the statues were white. And so when they imagined what ancient Greece was like, they imagined it was filled with these beautiful white statues and white buildings, and they just thought it was lovely and beautiful. And then they were like, I'm going to decorate my house to make it look like ancient Greece, and they would put white statues up. In fact, if you go to Astoria, Queens today, you will still see a lot of white statues, like all white marbles. I don't mean white people, I mean like white marble, white stone statues of lions and different kinds of people. And that's they were like, I'm going to make this look like ancient Greece, because Astoria has a lot of Greek immigrants, and so they wanted to sort of capture their homeland or whatever. What's really crazy, though, is some scientists in museums did some use some fancy sort of X-ray microscope technology kind of stuff to look more closely at these statues. And what they discovered was really interesting. They discovered that the statues, if you look with a microscope, you can see little microscopic bits of paint. Brightly colored paint. Yellow, bright red, bright green, bright blue. But Mike, they're microscopic. Well, why? Well, Greece, when you think about ancient Egypt, you think about colors, right? The statues in ancient Egypt have these crazy colors on, these bird gods with colored feathers and whatnot. And so when you picture ancient Egypt, you picture all these sort of beautifully colored statues, fascinating colors and feathers and things. But when you picture ancient Greece, you picture white statues. Well, why? Well, the answer is ridiculous. It's that Egypt is in the desert, and it is very dry. And ancient Greece was on the water, and it was extremely humid. And if you let thousands of years go by, if you have an ancient Egyptian statue under the sand, all the paint stays on. But if you had ancient Greek statues, which is getting constant humidity from the water, all the paint falls off. The statues in ancient Greece, those statues weren't white. They were just white when people found them. But back in the day, in ancient Greece, it looked like a Pixar movie. Like, it was like a children's cartoon. They were bursting with bonkers colors. And I think all of ancient Greece was covered in statues that were these brightly colored, crazy cartoon creations. Anyway, the point is that Oscar Wilde says that art doesn't tell you about the people. But in this case, the art that we have doesn't even tell us about the art back then. You got to get a microscope out to figure out what's going on. It's very misleading. But Oscar Wilde would probably say, you know what though? The white statue, it does look kind of cool. Let's keep it. And people will be like, that's not how it was back then. And he was like, I know, but I think it's cool. All right, I'll see you in the next video.